Well, good morning. Welcome back to the first hour of the Chris McCarthy Show. The sheriff is in studio here this morning. Good morning, Sheriff Hodgson. How are you, sir?
Great to be here, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I want to knock a couple of things out of the park here first. This I've already described it for the audience, but this foolish lawsuit that's being brought against you once again by the same old characters, in my opinion, not yours. That's mine. Talk a little bit about this and how frivolous it really is.
Yeah, first of all, this lawsuit is really a frivolous lawsuit for a number of different reasons. Number one, this same group that sued us for charging $5 a day, when the court came down with the ruling and said we had to have legislative approval, at that same time that they were suing us, they knew these phone contracts were being used by correctional facilities all over the nation. There's about 8,000 across the country that have these phone contracts to support the programs for inmates and support the phone service itself. And if they thought it was so wrong for the inmates, why didn't they sue at that time for that as well?
Right.
So, look, we know that they just were very much involved in this criminal justice reform legislation with some of these real liberal legislators who are more interested in being concerned about the people who have violated the rights of people than protecting the rights of the people who've been violated. And so they think that this is going to be their carryover, and now that would open the door for them to try to regulate things even more in the prison, at the expense of the taxpayer. So the reason it's a frivolous lawsuit is that, number one, it's perfectly within the law. Secondly, the state approved it.
Right.
The state sanctions these contracts. So for them to suggest that somehow, and of course it's not surprising that they would have picked Bristol County as their target, even though there's 10 other sheriff's departments in the Commonwealth that actually charge these commissions for the phones. In fact, we're not even the highest. Franklin County, which is a very small county out west, charges the first minute, the initial hookup fee and the first minute is $3.21. So look, these are being done by sheriffs all over the country. It's been in practice. We've had our contract for over 10 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so this is not anything new. And for them to try to use this now as one of their sort of rattling their sabers to try to regulate us more when they really have no understanding of what this goes toward and what it supports is really very unfortunate.
It seems rather transparent, quite frankly. So, Sheriff, tell the people, though. So yeah, you charge a little bit more, but first of all, do you monitor phone calls? Is that part of this?
We do.
All right. So it's not like when I call someone or you call someone. These calls have to be monitored, right?
Right. We monitor them because obviously we have major gang issues in the prison. We may pick up something where somebody's talking and may be distraught that we'd want to get right over to mental health or to somewhere else. So there's a cost, of course, for those putting those kinds of services in with IT support and things like that, and we need equipment also to be able to monitor. So these are all very important things that also go toward public safety, not only within the prison to protect the inmates that are there as well as our officers, but also in the communities. We're able to solve all kinds of crimes for different police departments, picking up witnesses. We had a situation in New Bedford a few years back where they had no witnesses to a shooting that had just happened at a store in the West End. And one of our detectives was listening to the phone calls and heard somebody say, "Hey, I was just at this shooting in New Bedford." Now we called New Bedford and said, "Hey, we got a guy that was at the shooting. This is the name." And they were able to finally get a witness, an eyewitness who was there, and then begin to work the case. We've had others where we've actually we solved the murder case. We had Connecticut call us a few years back, and I believe it was Connecticut State Police, and they said, "Listen, you just had a guy come into your regional lockup who is we believe may have been involved in murdering his girlfriend just in the last day or two, and can you monitor the calls?" So sure enough, we're monitoring the calls, and the guy's talking to a friend of his and says, hey, listen, I'm in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and I got arrested. Can you bail me out? And he said, well, why don't you call whatever the girlfriend's name was? And he said, she's not around anymore. It was enough probable cause for them to search his vehicle, and they found the murder weapon in the vehicle. So there are reasons why we have these systems in place, and there are ancillary benefits for the safety of the people who pay for the operations of the jail, which are the taxpayer. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing wrong for the taxpayer to get a return on their investment. And why should they, Chris? They're already paying on average, and I think we're probably about $26,000 a year per inmate. We're the lowest cost in the Commonwealth and have been almost for 20 years. Why should they have to, the taxpayers who are working hard every day, their kids are doing the right thing, they're doing the right thing. Why should they have to now cut back on things that they otherwise could do for their kids and buy them extra sneakers or whatever it is, because now the rising costs of the prison are costing them more in tax dollars? And why should the people who stole their kid's bike or broke into their home go to prison and think, hey, you know what? I'm absolved of any kind of responsibilities. The taxpayer can just keep paying. They can pay for my phone calls. They can pay for this. They can pay for that. And I'm just going to, sort of sit back in here and do my time. That's not okay. If you have money to buy candy, cookies, and upgraded sneakers, then you got money to pay your way. And that's why we get profits on the things that the inmates can purchase in the canteen over and above what we provide. And all that money goes to what we call inmate good.
All right. We'll talk about inmate good
Sure.
when we come back from the break. We're speaking with Sheriff Tom Hodgson. This is the Chris McCarthy Show. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back to the Chris McCarthy Show. Thanks for joining me. We have in studio Sheriff Tom Hodgson, as I call him, America's Sheriff, but he's technically Bristol County's Sheriff. So before we were discussing this frivolous lawsuit against you because of the price of the phone calls, and we started to talk about where does the money go. So you mentioned monitoring, but now let's talk about how it actually pays for inmate programs. Therefore, the taxpayers don't have to pay for it. Go ahead, Sheriff.
Right. So the legislature every year underfunds us at the beginning of the year by millions of dollars. Even though we bring in from our ICE operation on average about $6 to $7 million a year of new monies that go into the general fund.
Really?
Yeah. We built that facility without state money out there, and then we generate the revenues. I take on all the responsibilities for inspections by the federal government, all the liabilities. And when we drive all those revenues from holding these detainees, that money goes back to the general fund, and then we get underfunded by millions every year. So needless to say, we're like every other facility looking to try to make sure that we're covering as much as we can in the way of inmate programs to make sure that we don't fall short there. Our job is to hopefully help these individuals leave our place with at least one new tool in their toolbox, and enough that maybe they won't come back, which is our ultimate goal, because that impacts obviously public safety in a significant way. But what's interesting was when you listen to the people who filed this lawsuit, number one, they actually used the word kickback. Now, that was intentionally put in there to sensationalize what's going on here. We don't make any money on our operation. In fact, as I said, we're constantly looking for ways to cut and lower the burden on the taxpayer, shift as much responsibility as we can to the people who are costing the taxpayers money. And so this idea of them having to take on responsibility for them wanting to make phone calls, there's a real simple way to avoid all this. Don't come to jail. Don't leave the people in your neighborhood alone. Stop violating people's rights and committing crimes, and you won't even have to worry about paying the additional fees, because you're not costing the taxpayers money. Never mind the hardship that you gave them when you committed the crime against them. So that's the fundamental point. But more to the point is, what's really sad about this is this prison legal services group. They're as much politically driven as they are anything else. They're partially funded by the taxpayers' dollars. Think about this. The taxpayers are paying these people to sue the taxpayer. And they just got an increase in this year's budget, which is amazing to me. And at the same time, we got the law-abiding people struggling to get money from the budgets that they're paying into through their tax dollars to give them better programs in schools and, things that they need for their quality of life. But at any rate, they used the term kickback to try to sensationalize it. They also, sadly, attempted to use a story about a guy who had committed suicide, and exploiting the hardship of someone in a family that had experienced a suicide is really unconscionable to me. And the truth is, to suggest at all that it had something to do with the phone calls was outrageous, because I know the real story.
All right.
And I know exactly when it happened, and I know what was happening at the time in regards to that individual's personal situation. So that's the part that really is, I think, very, very wrong on the part of these people who are suing us, the taxpayer, by trying to advance more of a ideological and political agenda than they are really costing us money because there's some legitimate issue there.
We're speaking with Bristol County Sheriff Tom Hodgson about this lawsuit. We're going to talk about some other things too, because these people don't deserve all that much attention. But the Boston Globe jumps on the story. They love to write anything about you, and in a bad way. And I just wanted to get you in here because people have to know that the fee, it costs a little more to make a phone call from jail, but then that money stays in the system. And if it wasn't in the system, if you weren't charging them a little bit more, you'd be charging everybody else a little bit more in the form of the taxpayers.
Right. Either that, or we'd have to, if the legislature wouldn't make up the difference,
right,
then we'd be in a worse situation, because then we'd have to cut something in our operations, which then creates an environmental problem, which potentially could set off a bigger problem.
And when you mean environmental, you don't mean the birds and the bees environmental. You mean in the facility.
In the facility where it could raise tensions. It could cause somebody to get hurt or cause our officers to get hurt, inmates, whatever, because people start acting out when they don't get certain things that they want. So again, this is a very unusual sort of business that we're in. And when we have legislators stepping in and telling us how long we can keep people in solitary confinement with no knowledge of what we do in there and how the environment is really very absurd. And that's part of the problem with this criminal justice reform bill that unfortunately they've delved into.
We're speaking with Bristol County Sheriff Tom Hodgson. So, Sheriff, just so people understand, what are some of the programs that this money that the inmates that you generate from the inmates making phone calls that they're now saying is a kickback scheme, which is just, I knew when I saw that language, I knew it was ridiculous. It was just inflammatory and political. But, I mean, you take this money and keep it in-house to fund the programs that hopefully keep these guys from coming back, right?
Well, of course, that's partially it. We also have IT support for the phones and things like that. But, yeah, the kinds of programs that we have in our prison are pretty extensive. In spite of what you sometimes read in the more sort of liberal print media, we have one of the highest GED graduation rates in the state at our facility. We have religious programs. We have intense substance abuse programming, which includes mindfulness training, and we have basic reading programs. We have Changing Lives Through Literature. We have a lot of different programs, and then we have a lot of volunteers. And I have to tell you, God bless the people who give of their time and come and work with these inmates as volunteers. We have our REC program, our Residents Encountering Christ. And they not only do retreats at the facility, but they also then will come in every week, and they'll continue to follow up with those individuals who attended the retreat and do, readings and passages and things like that, and continue with them in prayer and so forth. So
just so people know that you said it quickly, the GED program, that's a high school graduate program, right?
It's an equivalency. Yeah,
equivalency. So if someone comes in and they don't, that's a big problem. If you don't have a high school diploma, it's really tough to get out there and get a job, regardless of your intentions once you get out.
Sure.
So you try to get as many of them through that GED program. What do you say? You have the highest graduation rate?
One of the highest in the state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's getting more tools in their toolbox, right?
Well, no question. And that's our goal. My staff know that. I tell them, look, we're not babysitters. And we didn't make the decision for people to come to prison. Judges did. But what we do have is probably the greatest opportunity to move people from a bad place to a better place in life. And there's nothing more powerful than that. So you're in a very unique place where your job every day is to try to help people either learn how to communicate better, direct them to programs that are going to help them not come back. That's what we do. We don't want people to come back.
The House of Correction. Right?
Corrections.
The House of Corrections. We'll take a very quick break. We'll come right back with Sheriff Tom Hodgson. And welcome back and good morning. I'm Chris McCarthy, and we have Bristol County Sheriff Tom Hodgson here in studio with us. So I know that the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, has my brain fogged up there for a second, is down at the
There was
border.
a lot of fog out this morning.
There is a lot of fog. There was. It's burned off now, thank God. So the Attorney General has gone down to the border he's saying, hey, look, we're going to bring in more judges. We're going to bring in more ICE agents. We're going to control it. We're going to keep these people right here. But I've never been to the border, but I know you haven't, so I thought people would appreciate that. Because first of all, just because the border's down there, the problem ends up here, right? I mean, the problem...
We're all border states.
Right.
We're all border states.
Right.
No question about it.
Right. And so you've been down to the border to observe, give your opinion, to learn about it. Tell us about some of your experiences at the border, Sheriff. I think that people at home would find them fascinating.
Well, the first one, when I first went, I went to El Paso, and what was amazing to me that we were very much sort of out in the desert area, and we drove right up to what was supposed to be the border fence. It was an old sort of aged oak post with 3 strands of barbed wire that came up to my waist that we just simply picked the post and moved it and walked right into the area. And it was interesting because while there were several sheriffs with me at the time, we could see right across the Rio Grande at that point where we were was actually dry. It was probably no wider than at the area in El Paso, probably 20 yards. And you could see, because there was lots of high growing weeds and things on the other side, the Mexican side, but you could see a sort of a dust trail coming. And one of the sheriffs from the border there had said, look, these guys, as soon as any of us are around, they have spotters all up and down here, and they report back who's where so that they know when they can get across, when or not. But they're in vehicles, and you could see this sort of dust trail. You couldn't see the vehicle, but you could tell it was a vehicle going on surveillance of us. And they have to be armed at all times as well, the sheriffs, when they're there, because you never know what could happen. Now, when we were in McAllen, that was very interesting. In McAllen, we saw everything. We saw the holding stations. We went up on aerial surveillance. When I was up in the air, we were going along over the Rio Grande, and we saw a yellow raft, and we had it right on the screens of the plane. And the guys beating feet across, trying to paddle across, and it's, of all things, in the middle of the day, a yellow raft. And he got halfway across. He heard the plane. He looked up. He saw us. He immediately turned his raft around and headed right back to the shore. Pulled the raft out, and gave us a wave that only included one finger as opposed to the other.
His IQ.
4.
Right?
Yeah,
His
exactly.
IQ, yeah.
So, but what's really interesting, most people don't know, the Rio Grande is not that wide. Where we were in McAllen, we were traveling up and down on the patrol boats. It's only about, I would say, no more than 100 yards at the widest point, and narrower at other places. And you can actually see rafts that were abandoned on the U.S. side, just sort of stuck on the shoreline there. And as we're going up and down, you can see the spotters. At one end, where we turned to come back, there were 2 or 3 guys standing there on what looked like a dock, and there was a big wall that went up to the upper road. And they were there for probably 3 hours, one of them holding a broom, never really seemed to move it much. And it was obvious that there was nothing to sweep on that little concrete area they were standing on. They were there to spot, let them know when they could go across. I was doing Al Jazeera had asked me to do an interview on the levee. And so I went down to the levee with another sheriff, and I'm doing an interview. And we're right on the levee, and in the middle of the interview, all of a sudden, we see a helicopter sweeping in. We see border agents coming in vehicles, dogs getting out. They start heading into the weeds and pulling these guys out. It was almost, you would have thought it was a movie set that was planned. It wasn't. It was just at that moment.
That's what goes on every day.
And this goes on every day. And the problem is, they also, which is an interesting thing people probably don't know, we were meeting with some of the ranchers, and they took us out to an area, and they have these, I think there's 2 or 3 water stations. If somebody gets that far inland in some of these areas, they're probably not going to make it all the way unless they have water. So they have these towers, and the illegals know that that's a water tower. And it also has an emergency button there. So if you made it there and you're dehydrated and you don't think you're going to make it, at least you have the water to try to sustain you. You push the emergency button on the tower, and the border agents will come. Well, you can imagine that quickly turned into a good sort of distraction piece for the cartels. So they tell a guy, hey, listen, hit that button, and when you do, we're going to mule the agents are all going to come there because they think you're dying. You take off, and we're going to go in around them where they otherwise would be and get the drugs into the U.S.
Because there's a fixed number of border agents, right? So if they can distract a group of them to go help a fake distressed person, it gives them the opportunity to then run these drug. And when you say mules, you mean drug mules?
Yes.
People who not actual mules. They're human beings who are either carrying backpacks or have inserted narcotics into themselves.
Right, and more often than not, they're carrying them in backpacks and so forth. But also, don't forget the human traffickers. That's a huge business. That's a huge moneymaker for the cartels, and they're bringing in kids. Mothers are handing their children off in Guatemala, Honduras, wherever. They're handing their teenage daughters off and giving them birth control pills before they hand them off to some stranger who's a coyote with the drug cartel for maybe a 1,000-mile trek to the border, knowing that their daughter's going to get raped at least once. So this is and then the child gets here with no family support, is put into a foster care home in New Bedford or somewhere else, wherever they ship the kids to. And then the child goes to school, doesn't understand the language, maybe never will because doesn't have a rudimentary understanding of their own language, becomes the brunt of all the kids' jokes in the classroom, and who would be the easiest target for bullies, right?
Right.
Then the child goes home after school to the foster care home, steps out into this neighborhood on the weekends or after school, and she becomes the target once again for the gangbangers and these other people. And I was speaking to a highly respected immigration attorney that I've known for years, telling him this whole thing. And he said, you know what, Tom? He said, you're exactly right. I can't tell you how many of these young girls that I have seen that have been victimized exactly the way you told me, time and time again, impregnated by these gangbangers.
It's unbelievable. It's really sad, and
right.
And, I mean, it's a horror show.
It is a horror show, and you know what? It's absolutely. We have laws in this country. You can go to the embassy if you really feel that you're threatened and you deserve refugee status. You go to the embassy in your country, and you plead your case to them. And the reason these people don't go is because they don't qualify. So instead, they say, "Forget the embassy. I'm going in." We can't have that because it's putting a strain on our criminal justice system. It's a double standard. It's saying to the people who are waiting their turn and respecting the laws of the United States that they're a bunch of fools for doing the right thing. Since when did we ever want anybody to believe that they were foolish for following the laws and obeying the laws of this nation?
No, it's terrible, and it's making an uncomfortable environment for legal immigrants who we want. You know, as the president says,
of course,
we want a big wall, but we want a big door in the wall, right?
Right, of course.
We're speaking with Bristol County Sheriff Tom Hodgson. If you'd like to give us a call, you can at 508-996-0500. The sheriff's always happy to take your calls. So you have been working with a project with the National Sheriff's Association to help with the wall. To update us on that. I know it's still in transition, if that's the right word. Give us an update if you could, Sheriff.
Yeah, what we're doing is, because this is kind of the first time they've ever been approached with something like this, we are working on a funding page. The page is already ready to go. It's been ready to go for a while. The only hiccup right now is getting the final answer about when the money starts coming in from people all over the country to build this wall and to secure our communities. We want to make sure that money's going directly to the wall project and not be diverted somewhere else where Congress could grab hold of it, because Congress certainly isn't doing what it needs to do to fund this wall, and we don't want them taking the money and using it for some other thing to advance their ideological agenda of not getting the wall built. So I've got DHS working with the attorneys at NSA, National Sheriffs, and we think we're getting pretty close to the formula that we're going to need. and then we're going to send it out. The sheriffs across this nation are going to go to their media outlets and start telling the public, listen, Congress has failed to do anything with this, and they continue to stonewall it for the last 20 years. Let's get it done. Let's get our community safe again. And we think we're going to see a tidal wave go across this country, and
I think it's an
do something pretty significant.
I think it's an amazing development in its democracy at its best. We're going to take a call.
Sure.
Good morning. Thanks for holding your live with Sheriff Tom Hodgson.
Good morning.
Morning, caller.
Respectfully, Sheriff Hodgson, you rock my world. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Well, thank you. You're nice to say that.
That's Deb. That's Deb, one of our best callers. My personal favorite caller, Deb. She's wonderful. All right, we'll take another call.
Sure.
Good morning. Thanks for holding your live at WBSM with Sheriff Tom Hodgson.
Yeah, how you doing? Hey, I just wanted to call and praise one of his employees. We had a anti-bullying seminar at my church last year, and the young lady from his department that came out and did it just did an exceptional job.
Yeah.
And I recommend it to anybody. It was an eye-opening experience.
Yeah, thank you for that caller. Kayla she does a fabulous job. She does the school programs for bullying, and we bring the kids in for the SLAM program as well. Students learning a message, where they come into the prison and the inmates speak to them, and then we take them on a tour. But the bullying program has been very, very well received. We've even offered it to the teachers about the education about following the law to make sure they're reporting those kinds of things, and how they can deal with it. But it is a very important program, and I appreciate the caller calling in, because she does do a fabulous job, and it's a great message for the kids. We've had a lot of success with it.
I hadn't realized that, but I know that one of the things you try to do, Sheriff, is that you want to get them before they get to you, right? I mean,
right.
before you have to learn their name officially, you want to try to help them out, right?
Yeah, I was speaking to a superintendent this morning about this. That we have got to get to these kids in elementary school, 3rd and 4th grade, before they ever get through the door of a prison. Our national policy is misguided. We keep trying to react to long-established behaviors and changing them, which is very costly and difficult to do. It takes a long, long time, and sometimes never for some people. But the only way we're going to cut down on building jails in this country and prisons, and cut down our recidivism rate, is if we change our policy, invest our monies in a big way at the front end, and give these kids the guidance that they're not getting, unfortunately, at home, or through the kinds of sort of reinforcements we had when we were growing up. Neighbors, right? The schools can't handle all this. They can't be the disciplinary place. So the parenting, that kind of thing.
And you guys are trying to step in and do great work ahead of time, and we applaud that. And I think the taxpayers here in Bristol County appreciate it, because you're trying to save us money in the long run. But I don't think it's money. I think it's, if you can cut down some of this chaos that's going on in communities, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, what chance does a child have at, say, 4 or 5 years old, sitting on a stoop, say on North Front Street in New Bedford, in November weather, in a T-shirt and a diaper, while the parents are pushing, or a parent is pushing drugs out on the street? That kid has no shot, and probably these are real stories here. You have parents that are too dope sick to get out of bed. If the kid's smart enough in kindergarten or 1st grade and strong enough to pull a stool over to a cabinet and grab some stale Rice Krispies before they go to school, that's breakfast. And the child doesn't get the care in the way of, clean clothes, clothes that match, goes to school thinking that the kids are going to be the surrogate family for them. And when they get there, they become the brunt of the kids' jokes. And so these things are happening very early on. These seeds are being planted, and the downward spiral starting, and then the anger and aggravation and things are starting to build and build and build until sometime the person carries out either some vicious attack or just spirals into a life of drugs and whatever else.
Yeah, it just creates an internal antisocial personality. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with Bristol County Sheriff Tom Hodgson. All right. Well, thanks for joining me. We have Sheriff Tom Hodgson, America's Sheriff, as I named him, but he's the Bristol County Sheriff here in Massachusetts, in studio with us. We're going to take another phone call. Good morning. Thanks for holding your live on WBSM.
Sheriff and Chris. Great job, Sheriff. The last time I heard you, you said you had some kind of a program, a task force that down in Mexico, the cartels would, give the Mexicans or Hondurans or whatever Puerto Rican IDs, and your task force was able to pick up the dialect of those people, in probably a criminal matter, obviously. And how is that doing? I'll hang up and listen to you.
Thanks for the call.
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, I just got back from meeting with the Director of ICE down in Washington, Tom Homan, about this very issue. That we have officers that are trained on the street. Police officers are trained by a sergeant out of Saugus PD, who really sort of uncovered this about 7 years ago and realized we have so many people in this country and in our state, of course, who are operating under false IDs. We just had one that had been released from our facility probably within the last month, was operating under 7 different identifications. And they're able to get these authentic birth certificates copied. And
from Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico is the big problem.
Okay.
Big problem. But they get them from other places as well. But Puerto Rico is the biggest issue for us, and particularly with the Dominican cartels and so forth. So now what we're doing is we're assigning one of our people full-time to query our database to find out how many imposters do we have in our prison setting. And I can assure you, we're going to find probably lots. But nationally, I'm working on getting the sheriffs across the nation to do the same thing. And we will come up, as I told the Director of ICE, we will come up with thousands and thousands and thousands of people across this country who we never knew are in our custody, who were able to use these false identifications for the longest time and not be detected. Now we have ways and methods to be able to do that, and we're finding more and more. I'm getting reports every day from the Saugus officer who is in contact with people in Maine, New Hampshire. I believe it's in Maine. They started working with the Registry of Motor Vehicles, and they're cooperating there to have their people trained to look at this training and start identifying when they come to the RMV and then report it to the police. So we're making some good strides with that. And the good news is this is not targeting illegals, although 98% of them probably will be illegals. We're targeting people for felony fraud under the ID law for the state. So this is something that it'll be a new edge for us, a force multiplier. And we won't be. We may be solving a lot of crimes that we otherwise had no idea who the person was, because we now found somebody operating under this false ID.
We're speaking with Sheriff Tom Hodgson, because if they don't have IDs, they really can't operate, right? I mean, it's a crucial part for the cartels to do this.
Yeah, they want to get they need to get the birth certificate. Once they get that, then they go and they get a legitimate driver's license in the state. So you presume these people are legal. But there's lots of different ways to determine. If I were to pull you over and you just got your driver's license 2 years ago, I'm thinking there's probably something that may be awry here, and I'm going to be asking a couple more questions.
Sure, because you just look at the person and say, "Well, what happened to us how is a 40-something-year-old man just got a driver's license, right?" Right. And so then you start to just pay a little more attention to that individual.
Sure, and then some of the officers are very good, as the caller said, about picking up the difference in the dialect.
Right.
And somebody says they're from one place, but they have a dialect from a different place. Then where your parents born, you start asking a couple of questions like that, and suddenly you start to find the contradictions.
Right. Hey, we've been speaking with Sheriff Tom Hodgson. The end of the hour is here. If I wasn't able to get to you, I'm sorry, but the phones were jammed the entire time. But Sheriff, thanks again for joining us. Thanks for everything you do.
Thanks for what you're doing, because I'll tell you, the public is becoming very educated through your good work, and it's important for them to know all sides of every issue, and it can't be done otherwise unless we can get it through people like yourself.
Well, I appreciate that, Sheriff. Folks, if you missed any of this interview, or you want to hear it again, and why wouldn't you? Or if you want to see the Sheriff and I, you can go to our YouTube channels.
That's a way to ruin your day.
Right? It'll be on WBSM.com and on our YouTube channel as well. We'll be back, folks. We're going to do this all over again for the next hour, and then I'll have Tim White doing the Mafia trial at 11:30.